President. Please be seated. The court is now back in session. Before we proceed to the counsel for the accused person, the Chamber would like to ask questions to the International Co-Prosecutor concerning the document. The prosecutor would like to give to the witness whether the document has already been managed to send through vessel unit to him or not. And also please indicate the name of the individual in the document, whether she was actually the spouse of this witness, and also the date when she entered as 21 and the exit date as well, if you can, please.
Mr. President, if I can please answer those questions in turn. Firstly, there has been contact with WESU over the luncheon adjournment. The document I had, as Mr. President, you know, was the revised S21 prisoner list, but it was felt that the original document should be found in Khmer rather. And so efforts was being made over the luncheon adjournment to find that document. When I left about 20 minutes ago, it hadn't yet been located, but there are people working on this, Mr. President, now, so that the original document, we hope, can be obtained and be available for Mr. Kim Vun, I hope, at the close of proceedings this afternoon. Mr. President, to answer your second question, the document shows, in terms of the name, a female, Chim Nari, alias Poan, P-H-O-A-N, the wife of Choam, a combatant of K25 office, and it states that the arrest was from the Ministry of Propaganda and Education, and the date of that was the 1st of May 1978, and then the other relevant date that you asked about, the 27th of May 1978. Does that answer, Mr. President, please, all of those questions?
Response. Yes, it does. Thank you. Next, may I know whether judges of the bench would like to put any questions to the witness? Judge Lavianya, you may now proceed.
Yes, thank you, Mr. President. Good afternoon, witness. I have a few questions to put to you to clarify a certain number of your statements. Yesterday, when you testified, you said that when the radio of the front was installed at B-20, that is to say before the fall of Phnom Penh, Khieu Samphan's statements that were broadcast over the radio were certainly written together with Prince Norodom Sihanouk. And you said then that his statement could not have only been written by Khieu Samphan. Do you remember having said that?
Response. Yes, I do, Your Honor.
So, did you witness any specific form of communication between Kyosampan and Prince Norodom Sihanouk back then? Or did you receive any kind of information that allows you to support this assertion? Or is this a simple conclusion or even speculation coming from you?
Response. I was talking about this because that was my analysis back during that time on the situation.
Of course, I understand that this is your analysis, but what I want to know is whether this analysis is based on information, specific information. Did you witness any kind of communication between Kyosampan and Prince Sihanouk? Do you know anything that may be useful to know? Or is this simply a conclusion?
Response. During the period of the Funk was chaired by Prince Norodom Sihanouk. And at that time, I still stand by what I analyzed. And whether I saw Prince Norodom Sihanouk and Kyosampan made the decision jointly or not, I do not know. I just felt at that time that without any decision made by the top level, then there would never be such statement being broadcast.
Well, this morning you spoke about another feeling. You said that according to you, Kyosampan's speeches that had been broadcast during the period of democratic Kampuchea, that is to say after the fall of Phnom Penh, had probably not been written by Kyosampan himself alone. And you even said that you could substantiate this because as far as you remember, in regard to Kyosampan's speeches during the period of the front, that Kyosampan used that the speeches have been written with long sentences. Is that the only element that substantiates your analysis, the length of the sentences? Or do you have any other elements that allow you to understand why you believe Kyosampan did not write these speeches on his own?
Response. My statement will never be different from that I gave previously.
Do you wish to add anything? Because I didn't understand if you wanted to add something different in relation to what you said this morning, or do you stand by what you told us this morning?
Response. I still stand by my position that Mr. Kyosampan alone could never be making the statement, and that was part of my analysis.
Witness, you also were questioned by the investigators of the OCIAJ, so I'm going to try to summarize what you said regarding Kyosampan. You compared him to an elephant, to a handicapped elephant, an elephant without legs, or without any strength in his legs. And you also said that Que Sampan was perceived as a victim, specifying that that was the impression people might have had under Norodom Sihanouk, as well as during the period of the FRUNC, as well as during the period of Democratic Kampuchea even. And you also added that according to you, he was a man who never enjoyed real power. And if I understood properly, you specified that Que Sampan's role during the period of Democratic Kampuchea consisted essentially in also supervising transport, supplying to the bases, and to receive foreign dignitaries, to accompany Prince Norodom Sihanouk and his wife when they were traveling to the countryside. So did I summarize properly what you were trying to tell the OCIJ, or am I mistaken?
Response: that is, Your Honor, the full accurate passage of what I stated.
So, well, then I have a few questions to try to understand if this is a feeling or if this is some kind of analysis that you drew and what this analysis is based on. You said that you met Que Sampan when you were traveling, when you were writing stories in the countryside. Did you meet him very often? As I remember from this morning, you told us that you had only met him once. How many times did you meet Que Sampan?
Response: I met him by accident only on one occasion. I did not meet him face to face. It was when I went to take some photographs in the bases, and I talked to my colleagues who told me that Que Sampan was in a vehicle with some Dutch pine nut. I noted the vehicle and I believed that it was him in that vehicle. So I can say for sure that I never met him face to face or in person.
So, you never met him personally? You never spoke to him about his role? And he never was your superior? He never checked your work? I think this is what you said to us this morning. So, did you have access to any information on Que Sampan's role? For example, in offices called K1, K3, do you have any information on the operations of Office 870?
Response: at that time, I did not know where the leaders could have been working. I knew only about what happened at my ministry.
Did you get any specific information on the relations between Que Sampan, Ieng Sary, Pol Pot, Nguyen Chia, Ieng Tirit, Son Sen? Do you know who attended the meetings of the Standing Committee?
Response: I was not authorized to understand anything about the roles or the function of the leaders.
Fine. So let me put the question to you again in a more general way. So do you have any information or other information that allow you to support your analysis according to which Khieu Samphan was a man who never enjoyed real power.
Qu'est-ce qui vous permet?
What allows you to assert this?
Response. I may wish to raise this for consideration. I had been in the resistance for several years. After the Khmer Rouge collapsed, I came back to Cambodia, and in this capacity, I know for sure what happened. So my belief was that Mr. Khieu Samphan did never enjoy power. He did not possess any assets. And to be more precise, Mr. Khieu Samphan should be asked now to shed light on this.
Fine. Okay, let's move on to another topic, which is the role of Mr. Nunchia. And you spoke about this very briefly this morning. You had also spoken about this before the investigators of the OCIJ, and you said to them that Nunchia came to run the Ministry of Information, Education and Radio after the arrest of Mr. Hunim and after Yun Yat took charge of both ministries, Ministry of Education and Information. And this morning you told us that Nunchia only came on an intermittent basis. So can you tell us a bit more about what Nunchia was doing at the Ministry of Propaganda and Education?
Response. Actually, Mr. Nunchia had a role in the education program. The education program was on agriculture. He brought a thick book by the Chinese experts in which he quoted one page at a time for the education purpose. That's what I learned back then. And with regard to other documents, I do not know how the communication took place. The only thing I knew about his new role was involving the agricultural aspect. And I still recall the thick book by the Chinese expert on the rice, techniques in growing rice, and it was part of the education purpose.
Did Nunchia simply come to give training and to provide information on agricultural issues, or did he also control the subordinates and oversee how the subordinates were working? And did he have any kind of control over the information that was broadcast over the radio? Did he replace Miss Yun Yat, or did he simply come to assist her, let's say, on...
Response. His fundamental program was the new education on agriculture, and I have no other knowledge of his involvement in other section in writing in particular, because I had been transferred to the Cambodia Crown radio section when Mr. Nunchia was assigned to the propaganda department. He only came most often when Yun Yat was not present.
Do you know if there was any kind of connection between the Ministry of Information and Propaganda and the Ministry of Foreign Affairs? For example, would documents for the Ministry of Foreign Affairs, were documents for the Ministry of Foreign Affairs ever printed at the Ministry of Information and Propaganda, for example?
Response. So far as I remember, there were not a lot of documents relevant to this. For the Khmer radio broadcast, there would be the Khmer statement, and sometimes we were given some documents to be read, and also a foreign language program on the radios.
And do you remember speeches by Yang Sari or by Nguyen Chia being broadcast?
Response. With regard to all the radio programs, I focused mainly on the assigned task for me in particular, and I had paid no attention to other programs, and I had nothing to know about that or those statements.
And during the period of the front, that is to say before 17 April 1975, did you have the opportunity to meet Mr. Hu Yun? And did Hu Yun work for the information department?
Response. Mr. Hu Yun, to my best of knowledge, was the minister in charge of rural development or reform at cooperatives, but I have no idea or I have no knowledge of his other roles.
So you never had any kind of contact with him back then, is that so?
Response. I had never contacted with him. I met him on some occasions just to chit-chat with him. I also cut his hair. I cut the hair for people during that time, for senior people, including Mr. Khieu Samphan. Mr. Hu Yun was at times allowed me to cut his hair because I was a good barber.
And do you know what happened to Hu Yun after 17 April 1975?
Response. No, I have no information about him. But at B20, I used to meet him prior to 1975, but not after that.
Alors, venons-en à un dernier sujet.
Let us talk about a last subject. It has to do with the Revolutionary Youth magazine. You stated that it was the front that was in charge of the preparation and publication of that magazine. Is that the case?
Response. No, it isn't.
Alors, quel était votre rôle au regard
So, what was your role regarding the Revolutionary Youth magazine? What did you do precisely?
Response. Please allow me to clarify on this. At the printing house, we print in 3 magazines: the Revolutionary Flag magazines, the Front magazines. As for the youth magazines, were printed at a later date. They were printed in 1972 or 1973, so far as I remember, because I had never seen the documents before. I only came to know this document at S31, or rather Office 31. So these magazines could have been printed at a later date for the purpose of publicizing information to inform the Youth League group.
Do you know who drafted articles for the Revolutionary Youth magazine?
To my knowledge, in the initial inception, Madame Yun Jat was the one who wrote article in that magazine.
Alors, pour être plus précis,
To be more specific, you told the co-investigating judges the following. It was Yun Yat who wrote articles with the assistance of my team, end of quote. Does this reflect the truth? Did you have a team that assisted those who wrote those articles?
Yes, it does. But it was not within the funk, but it was It was not within the funk, but it was in the Democratic Cambodia period. And my wife was an assistant to her as well. And of course, the minister also had other assistants as well in order to assist. But as for short news, I and my team also assisted.
à quel public
What was the target readership or public of that Revolutionary Youth magazine? As of what age were you supposed to read that magazine?
As a matter of fact, if anyone wanted to join the Youth League, they had to be at the age of 18 at least. So if they reached the age of 18, they can join the Youth League, and then they were also allowed to read the Youth magazine.
La revue Jeunesse révolutionnaire avait
The Revolutionary Youth magazine had an ideological vision. Did it also have another objective, to rouse the anger or the hatred of the youths against class enemies, and ultimately to incite them to destroy the enemies of the nation, and to do so completely up until they were extinguished or decimated? Was that one of the visions of that magazine?
I did not understand it any better, but at that time what I understood was that the Communist Party of Cambodia considered the Youth League as the close aid of the party. So anyone who were in the Youth League, they had to be at the forefront. They were the vanguard forces of the party. And this particular youth organization were politically indoctrinated in a more intensive manner compared to ordinary youth.
And did such indoctrination go as far as arousing anger against the enemies?
As for the enemy, actually we did not consider everyone or our enemy as enemy per se, but we could sometimes consider them as our friends as well. We did not hold the absolute standpoint. For example, if we were unsure whether or not they were the real enemies of us or not, then we had some reservation for ourselves. At that times, we were instructed to analyze the strengths and weaknesses of those people. For example, they may identify certain group of people as enemies, but there were only a few leaders. But during the wartime, they only single out the ringleaders of the coup d'etat that was plotted, and we consider those leaders as the enemies. If we discuss the front comprised of all the nationalist movement at the time. So as for the spurring of the anger among youth was not done spontaneously, but it was planned very well.
Est-ce que vous vous souvenez, monsieur?
Mr. Witness, do you recall a poem? And that is how it was called. It was published in Review number 10 of October 1975 of the Revolutionary Youth magazine, E3729, Khmer ERN 0073, 432 to 434. In French, 0090, 36 to 38, 00 3579. The title of the poem was "Do Not Forget the Blood Grudge of Our Revolutionary Ancestors."
I could have heard of this poem, but I do not recall it now.
Bien, dans ce cas, je n'aurai pas d'autres questions.
Very well. I have no further questions for you then, witness. I thank you for your cooperation.
The President, thank you, Judge. Now, I hand over to the defense team for Mr. Kiew Sampon to put the question to the witness before the other two defense teams. You may proceed. Counsel Kung Samon. Thank you, Mr. President. Good afternoon, Your Honors, and good afternoon, Mr. Kumvon. My name is Kung Samon. I am the National Defense Counsel for Mr. Kiew Sampon. I have a few questions to ask you, and I look forward to your cooperation in responding to the question I'm going to put to you. Thank you. Over the last couple of days, you had spent a lot of efforts and time to respond to the question concerning the roles of Mr. Kyu Sampon and what you testify before the chamber in response to the question by the prosecution, the civil party lawyers, as well as Judge Lavenge. I would like to ask a few more questions in order to clarify the points so that the chambers will be enlightened by the points, so that the chamber will have the basis for their decision in relation to our client. First, I would like to begin with the scope of authority of Mr. Kyu Sampon. The parties did put questions to you, and you made an analogy in comparing Mr. Kyu Sampon's authority. You, by way of analogy, you said Mr. Kyu Sampon's roles was like the elephant which does not have its legs. And the defense team for Mr. Kyu Sampon would like to ask you to bring up certain documents to corroborate your testimony.
So look,
now I would like to begin my questions with your childhood. When you were a child in 1967 or so, you had your brother who was a civil servant, and your brother once told you the story about Mr. Kyu Sampon. Did you ever tell that to the investigator of the co-investigating judges about that? Response: no, at that time I did not touch upon the story concerning Mr. Kyu Sampon then, but I do recall the story my brother told me when I was young. I was still a young kid at that time. He told me about the stories. Question: can you tell the court how old were you then? The President: witness, please hold on. The mic is not yet activated, so please just wait. Response: at the time, I cannot recall it very well, but it was when I was around 4 or 5 years old. At that time, Mr. Kyu Sampon was in Phnom Penh, and I think that the story he told and the surmise he had with Mr. Kyu Sampon was correct. Counsel, for a record, I would like to now read out document D 201/10.1. Since there was no translation as far as I was told, so I would like to read out the document number again. In the transcript of your interview by the investigator of the Office of Co-Investigating Judges, document D 201/10.1, Khmer ERN 00 833791, English ERN 00 834919, French 00 835738-39. In that interview, you told the investigator, and it was recorded, it was audio recorded, but it was not actually transcribed in your record of interview, and I would like to read it out, your written record of interview. There were 2 points in this written records, but I would like to, they were in different places, but I would like to read it out. You said, while I was with him during the National United Front era, I never saw him have any power. And that was why I say that although he was a big elephant, he was like an elephant with a broken leg, an elephant that had no power. In this regard, I knew the background of Mr. Kilsumpon, had studied and had heard brothers tell stories in 1967-68, because my siblings were also government workers in Phnom Penh. They often talked about Kilsumpon. In those days, speaking about the Sihanouk authorities, Kilsumpon was seen as a victim. Do you recall saying this in front of the investigator?
បាទសូមទោសដោយសារ
Sorry, I have to pause because I have to ensure that my version of the question is properly rendered. So you may respond then.
ចឹងសូមលោក
Do you recall saying this before the investigator of the OCIJ? The President. Witness, please observe the red light on your mic. Make sure that it is on before you speak, otherwise your voice will not get through the sound system, and so the interpretation cannot be rendered. Yes, I do.
បាទសូមអរគុណ
Thank you. Question. Can you recall the stories told by your brothers in relation to Mr. Kilsumpon back then? When my brother Sim told me about the stories, I listened to him, but I was still very young. Of course, he went to study in Phnom Penh. He told us the stories about Kilsumpon. To my recollection, he told me that Mr. Kilsumpon was actually a senior government official. However, in his everyday life, he was not seen as someone who lived a good life. He would ride bicycle like other ordinary citizens as well. It was not like he was not like other senior government officials. But I was very young at that time. I cannot recall everything. I could only imagine it through my intuition, and until now I could simply recall it, part of it. And then he once told me that Kilsumpon would one day become the president of the country, and I did not understand, since I was young, what the president did at that time. But that's what I can recall from what he told me back then. And in addition, he also told me about the mistreatment inflicted on Mr. Kilsumpon by other civil servants, and he was viewed as someone who resisted against that mistreatment. And in the region where I resided, were also known that there were presence of Khmer Rouge as well. And I did not know why they mistreated him, because he was engaged or involved in the resistance forces or so. I did not know. I was very young. I did not pay much attention as to who was who at that time. It was only up to my recollection, and it was based on my pure recollection of that, and I did not know the intention of the situation or the storytelling then?
បាទសូមអរគុណ
Question. Thank you. Concerning your age in document E3/380, which is the record of interview, you said that you was born in 1959. Is this your genuine date of birth, or it was the fake one? Well, during the revolutionary era, we could use a different name when we changed the place of our domicile, and we could also change our date of birth as well. But I did not change, though. I maintain my date of birth ever since. Particularly with Brother Vaughan to the North Zone. Thank you. Question. So if you were born in 1959, the story told by your brother in 1968 or 69, then back then you were about 10 or 11 years of age. Is that correct? Counsel, can you please repeat your answer? Response. Yes, it could have been between that age range.
បាទសូមអរគុណ
Thank you. Now I would like to ask you about Mr. Kilsampon. You once said that you met with Mr. Kilsampon in the jungle, in an office in the jungle, before 1975. So my question is, how long did you work in that printing house in the forest, and how often did you see Mr. Kilsampon? It was in 1971, to my recollection. He did not go to my workplace that often because most of the documents were brought to us through messengers. But later on, we wanted to expand this printing house, and in addition we had to prepare for a radio broadcast as well. So the personnel over there was expanded, so it became an office over there. There were cadres who worked for the front there, and the numbers kept increasing. And I could say that in that period, we stayed together in that office. But I did not know the exact number of cadres who were working there. I do not recall the exact numbers of them, but I can recall that there was the presence of Mr. Kilsampon there too.
បាទសូមអរគុណ
Thank you. Question. Can you recollect the entire period of time you stay in that office with Mr. Kilsampon? How long did it last? How many months or years or so? The President witness, please be reminded that you wait until you see the red light is on before you respond. Response. I do not recall how long I stayed there with him, but I only recall that he was there at the time.
បាទសូមអរគុណ
Thank you. How did you recognize Mr. Kieu Sampon from 1971 when you were working in that office in the forest. How did you recognize Mr. Kieu Sampon? Response. Before I did not recognize him because I did not know what Mr. Kieu Sampon looked like, but I learned that he was a former professor and he was an intellectual. And my friends told me that, and one day I asked my colleagues who was the gentleman who had a white complexion and looked like Chinese. And at that time, I thought that he was someone from Hanoi, and Brother Lim, other brothers were from Hanoi. At that time, I did not have any idea about him. I thought that Mr. Kieu Sampon was also from Hanoi. But later on, my friends told me that that was Mr. Kieu Sampon. He was educated in France and he returned from France. And at that time, over there, we also used some French language as well. That's why I got to know him from there, but he had never introduced himself to others that he was Kieu Sampon, but we was told by our superior, and we just asked whether or not he was from the northern part of the country or he was from somewhere else, because he had fair complexion, and they told us that he was a person who came from the northern part of the country. Thank you. Question. When you learned that a man was Kieu Sampon, what was your impression of him? When I was there with him, I tried to observe his personality. I heard from others who talk a lot about his background. He had endured a lot of struggles in life, and at his age he was supposed to have family, but he did not. So I learned from him, and I was happy because there was intellectuals among us. And when there was coup d'etats, we had to join force with them. Actually, I was influenced very much by some like when I first joined the revolution. It was because of the influence by some like So other cadres talked to each other at that time that we had to work with those intellectuals in order to strengthen our motivation. Personality-wise, he was a person who was arrogant. He was the one who liked to encourage other people. He talked to other people very friendly, particularly those who were younger than him. And if he worked in his office, he got bored, he would leave the office and then walk back and forth, saying things to other people. And I look up to his model because it was at his age and he did not get married. I could not do as well as he did.
Excusez-moi, Monsieur le Président.
Mr. President, if you please allow me. In French, we heard at the beginning of the witness's answer that Monsieur Kieu Sampon was someone who was arrogant. I don't know if I would like to make sure that there wasn't a translation mistake, because I would like the witness to qualify this, because it doesn't seem to correspond to the rest of his answer.
Counsel Kung Samon, thank you, and we may wish you to repeat this for the purpose of interpreting, because I heard clearly in Khmer already, but perhaps it's not right in the English or French. Response. What was that question again, please? Counsel. In French, we heard that you said Mr. Kieu Sampon was an arrogant person. Is that what you said, or it was misquoted. The President, please wait, Mr. Witness, until you see the red light. You may now proceed. Response. I did not say he was arrogant. I said I learned a lot from him because he was at that time quite at an old age, but then he's still not yet married, so that's what I wanted. Counsel, thank you for the clarification. I would like now to proceed to my next question. My next question is, now we would like to ask you a question concerning Mr. Kyosampon. Again, you said that Mr. Kyosampon encouraged you and other people who worked at the printing house. How did Mr. Kyosampon encourage you? I mean, what kind of wordings he used in that? Response. As a matter of nature and logic, young children who left home could be very homesick. They would like to visit home, and Mr. Kyosampon would just say that, look, during the time of war, we could not visit home as we wished, and he talked about the Tribunal regime, about the former prince who was toppled down from power, and he talked about the front, and he asked us to be vigilant, to be careful. For example, when we cooked our food, we had to dig a long canal, and so that the smoke from the fire could not spread or could not be flying to alert others, so it could be resolved easily. So this is also was part of his advice, that if we could manage to control the fire, then we could escape from being bombarded by the aerial bombardments. So these are were part of his wordings to encourage us, to ask us to be very careful with our daily life, like that. Counsel, thank you. I would like to also ask you concerning the wordings of Mr. Kyosampon. Did he ever use words of violent nature? For example, asked you to use forces or violence in doing things? Response. I have never heard or were never told things like that. At the beginning, we learned the 12 points morality, and when I was a pagoda boy, I also was familiar with this. And indeed, if we could follow these 12 point morality, we would become a very good person. We were always referred to this 12 points morality by him. In the 12-point moralities, principles including refraining from stealing, combatants were expected not to steal things, even a grain of rice or a chili. So that was part of the education and encouragement sessions by Mr. Kilsampon. Council, thank you. In respect of your recognition of Mr. Kilsampon's handwriting, and you went further to say that you even recognized the text that could have been, or that perhaps have been written by Mr. Kilsampon. Just now, Judge Lavergne asked you the question concerning the long sentences, the paragraph that observe very few periods. So my question here is, how could you recognize that those texts were written by Kilsampon? Or I can put it this way. Apart from noting the long sentences that you believe could have been written by Kilsampon, did you have any other observation or elements to help you recognize his style of writing? Response. Among the leaders of the front, Mr. Kilsampon is rather unique. Mr. Hunnam and Tewol had a different writing style individually. The Pok Koma also had his own writing style. All intellectuals had a different and unique writing style. Council, thank you. Now, in the same context, the texts you saw, were they handwritten texts or printed materials? Response. When I was with him, I noted that he normally wrote by hands, and his sentences were longer than those of the others, and the paragraph normally ended with very few periods or without a full stop. So this happened in the statements, and when it comes to speeches that had to be broadcast on radio, I noted that the speeches were written of shorter sentences, and by that I believe that it could have never been written alone by Mr. Kilsampon, because I got used to his style of writing already. Council, thank you. I now would like to ask you a question concerning the period after 1975, between 1975 and 1979. Indeed, this question relates to the event in the aftermath of the immediate victory of the Khmer Rouge of the 17th of April 1975. You said you saw Mr. Kilsampon accompanying Prince Norodom Sihanouk at the countryside, and Judge Lavergne already asked you the question concerning this. My question here is that or your testimony was that you met Mr. Kilsampon by chance. The question is, how did you recognize the person you saw as Mr. Kilsampon? Response: I could recognize him easily because I used to be with him. I could distinguish between who would be Kilsampon, who would be Samdach Au, and who would be other people who were the children of the former prince. At that time, he was in a vehicle, but I could not recall whether he was in a jeep. But normally when the king was traveling, the king could be carried, accommodated in a better vehicle. I did not really talk to him, but after looking or seeing him from the distance, I could tell immediately that he was Kilsampon. The President: thank you, Counsel. Thank you, Mr. Witness. It is now an appropriate moment for an adjournment. The Chamber will adjourn for 20 minutes. Court officer is now instructed to assist the witness during the adjournment and have him return to the courtroom when we resume by 3 o'clock.
សូមអញ្ជើញក្រោកឈរ